Welcome back to Up and Adam. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Up and Adam Show and like the Twin Cities News Talk Facebook page. We're talking about whether or not felons should have their voting rights restored prior to finishing probation. In to debate, Andy Cilek with the Minnesota Voters Alliance and Sarah Walker with the Restore the Vote Minnesota and the Second Chance Coalition. A lot of phone calls, and we're going to try to get to all of them. But first, Andrew, let's take Sarah down at the bottom in St. Paul.
Good morning, Sarah.
Sarah.
Hi, good morning. I just had a quick question. I'm curious if Republicans support this, if Democrats support this, and if this actually has any chance of passing at the Capitol this year.
Thank you, Sarah.
Well, I'd like to. Well, can I address that? Because when I said that it was largely out of public view, and you guys all beat the heck out of me, I wasn't given the opportunity too much here to explain what I mean. The bill is now part of a Senate omnibus bill. Let's talk about the Senate for a minute. There's not one Republican, to answer your caller, not one Republican that I'm aware of that supports this bill in the Senate.
Dan Hall was in here last week.
There is one? Okay,
Maybe you should read the bill because in
there is one.
Here are people on the bill.
This means that there's an attempt to put it into law, passed with a vote, which also covers hundreds and more other bills. And hundreds of pages. So this is what I mean by out of public view. It had no support. It did not pass in the House. There was a handful of Republicans that supported it, and then several of them, including Steve Draskowski, withdrew their name. So it had a teeny bit of support and I wouldn't even call this bipartisan.
Sarah?
I would argue, and it's been heralded by all of the papers I mentioned earlier, as probably one of the most bipartisan bills of the session. And to point this
this is the same Star Tribune that says we got the best election system in Minnesota, Sarah.
It's not just the Star Tribune, but here are the Senate Republicans on the bill. We have Senator Dan Hall, Senator Chamberlain, Senator Thompson, Senator Benson, Senator Senjim.
Yeah, not a lot of squishes on that one. I mean, those are pretty.
And in the House, we have 10 Republicans on the bill, including the chair of the Public Safety Committee, Representative Tony Cornish. And if you look to the expansiveness of our coalition, we have the Republican Liberty Caucus. We have Liberty Minnesota. We have the Blue Republicans. We also have the Minnesota County.
I wouldn't call that bipartisan either. Come on, Sarah, it didn't pass in the House. They had a very small handful of Republicans that supported this bill. 3 or 4 of them have already withdrawn their name. That's what we're interested in, is getting the word out, because every Republican, once they really get to see the harm that's done to society here and hear all the arguments, that there's not a Republican that should go within a mile of this bill.
Andrew?
Specifically, your second point was that this is harmful to law-abiding Minnesotans. How?
Well, and I appreciate the opportunity. The prime purpose of of sentences is to protect law-abiding citizens from those who have shown a willingness to harm others. This law would allow tens of thousands of criminals, over 60,000 statewide, to vote before they have shown they can live in the community as law-abiding way. Please bear with me and let me get through just a couple sentences. In Minnesota, over 60% of felons released from prison are back within 3 years, the highest in the nation, in spite of there being extensive rehabilitation programs. This is according to a USA Today article on April 13, 2011 from the Pew Research. What Sarah would have us believe is that even though these rehabilitation programs haven't worked, what will work, though, is a magic bullet which allows them to vote. If, in fact, as Sarah claims, voting is such a powerful incentive for these people, then it should be used, as it is now, as a reward for changing their behavior. A rapist is not going to quit raping simply because he has gotten back the right to vote. In reality, this proposed change is merely just a way to let tens of thousands of felons vote between imprisonment. Until a felon has demonstrated the ability to live within the law, he shouldn't be involved in electing our leaders.
Each of those nonviolent offender.
Right. Each of those felons has had a victim or multiple victims. Existing law protects those victims. The felons are not the victims here. They are not worthy of broad special relief from their sentences. Why should a rapist, this is my last sentence on this, why should a rapist or a man who has threatened a judge or prosecutor or attacked a policeman be allowed to vote for judges or sheriffs before he has completed his sentence?
So, well, I guess, I really appreciate you making my statements before I have actually made them. But I think really...
He was in the public view. Okay. You've already made him.
Let her have a chance.
I mean, first of all, I would say this. I don't know if you've looked at our coalition, but the Minnesota County Attorneys Association is supportive of this. The Parole and Probation Association...
And they're all Democrats. Yeah.
I think, actually, I'm quite positive there's a number of county attorneys who are rolling over in the grave. As you say, they're all Democrats. but the Minnesota Corrections Association, the Minnesota Community Corrections Association, there have been numerous studies that suggest that people who vote actually commit less crimes because they are invested in the community. But more importantly, I think there's a huge contradiction you're making, and I would hope that you would choose liberty over anything else.
Name one study.
Name what? It's done by the Florida Parole and Probation Society.
That because they had the right to vote?
Yes, and then they found that there was a reduction in recidivism. And if you've looked at our website, since you have clearly read some of my statements, you can find the citation that demonstrates this.
Let's take Adam in Shaughnessy. Good morning, Adam. Hello, Adam.
Good morning, Adam.
Hi, are you talking to me?
Are you Adam?
I'm Adam, but
There
I'm
we
not
go.
from wherever you said. I'm from Chanhassen.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, it's just Sarah said that we have one of the highest probation rates in the country, and yes, while that's true, we also have one of the lowest incarceration rates. I believe we're in the top 5 in the nation, and that's due to those sentencing guidelines that got brought up earlier. And we all kind of thought those were great in the beginning because it did lower our incarceration rate quite significantly, but it did bring up our probation rate to where it is today. But I think that's more of a symptom because this probation is used now in lieu of incarceration. So if these people would have been in jail, released, they'd have their vote back. But now since they're on probation, they're not in jail, they're still serving their sentence for their crime. As far as parole goes, parole is usually a condition of early release from incarceration, so that's still part of their sentence that they're serving. Historically, recidivism naturally reduces after 3 years. There's not a whole lot of studies. There's so many studies that can point to many, many different reasons as to why, but it's mostly just age, reintegration in the community. These things take time.
Thanks, Adam.
Yeah,
In Chanhassen, not Shaughnessy.
I just want to say I'm actually on the Minnesota Sentencing Guidelines Commission, and the caller is actually right that the sentencing guidelines were enacted, and it was seen as a great thing in Minnesota. Many other states tried to follow us, but what's happened over the course of the last decade is, in fact, Minnesota's sentencing guidelines have increased their length, and we actually have one of the few states that has an increasing incarceration rate rather than a decreasing one. But the other thing I will say is I don't disagree that probation has been used, and I think that's a good thing instead of incarceration. However, as a society, what we are saying when we release someone in probation is that we expect them to interact in every other form of government. We expect them to do everything, be taxed,
Hey, get a
take their kids
job,
to school,
pay
get a job.
taxes.
And so if we are saying they're safe enough to be our neighbors, we expect them to raise their kids. I think we're leaving out the family component here. This has a long-lasting impact on individuals. They aren't able to vote on their own children's school boards.
Let's take Walter before we take a break. Walter Hudson. Good morning, Walter.
Hey, glad to be here. Of course, I'm familiar with Andy and Sarah as well, and I'm the current acting chair of the Republican Liberty Caucus, one of the organizations that's supportive of this proposed change in voting. And I just, if I had enough time, I could dispute everything that Andy said.
You should get a podcast.
I'm going to focus.
Yeah. Well, did the Republican Liberty Caucus vote on this, or is it just you, Walter, speaking on their behalf? Because I don't believe that.
Well, I don't care what you believe, because what you believe is not what's factual, and what you believe is what you've been portraying as factual all morning.
No, it's what you've been portraying down at the Capitol. I watched your Senate hearing.
Excuse me. I'm talking, please.
Go ahead, Walter.
Andy, please, I know you personally. I consider you a friend. Pay me the respect of hearing me out. First of all, to answer your direct question, this issue was voted upon by the board of the Republican Liberty Caucus, and there was a passing vote. It was not unanimous, but it was passing. And the two things that I want to dispute here are, one, that this is something that's taking place in the cloak of darkness outside the public view, and the other, that it's a partisan issue. Both of those are blatantly wrong. I attended a huge public rally. I went to as you noted, a Senate hearing. Those are public meetings, as you well know, Andy. There have been multiple Senate committee hearings on this. There have also been 3 op-eds in 3 major papers here in Minnesota, I believe Rochester, the Pioneer Press, the Star Tribune, and St. Cloud. So to say that this is happening in the cloak of darkness is a blatant misrepresentation.
No, what I meant by that is the current process to go around an omnibus bill, Walter. You weren't listening.
No. After I hang up, you'll have all kinds of time to call me a liar and call me a squish and a rhino, okay? So for the time being, I just want to reiterate the fact that the Republican Liberty Caucus is behind this. Liberty, Minnesota.
Yeah,
which
the
is by
board
no
is.
means-
I asked you
by
if the
no
people,
means
if
a
the people of the
Democrat
Republican Liberty
liberal
Caucus, and you just said the board.
All right, Walter, we have to take a break. I apologize, but I'm sure we'll be talking about this on your podcast. Fighting Words available at the TwinCitiesNewsTalk.com website. Dave, Dan, James, Shannon, hang on the line. We will get to you talking with Andy Cilek with the Minnesota Voters Alliance and Sarah Walker with the Second Chance Coalition about restoring felon voting rights.
Up and at 'em. Of all the morning shows that are on, this is one of them.
On Twin Cities News Talk, AM 1130.